Good morning, everybody. This is Walk the Dog Season 2, Episode 9, I believe. And I am recording this on Tuesday, right before the patch rundown notes go out. So actually, I'm going to record this, then I'm going to go sit and watch people's reaction to the patch notes. And yeah. And then also, yesterday was the first day back to work. Everyone kind of ramping up, you know, playtest set 17, and then a lot of discussions about the implications of set 16 and how that's doing. Because obviously I can't tell you anything, but the TLDR is set 16 is doing pretty darn good, so which is always nice to see. So that being said, I'm also experiencing, I think, the post break sort of whatever you want to call it funk, where it's like I definitely don't feel 100%. I don't feel like I'm like crushing it. I'm like, I wouldn't mind just crawling back into bed for a bit. So got to find a way to wake up and get going. So yeah. Anyway, uh, we just had morning meta report and patch rundown. So today you get to walk the dog, and I figured I'd answer some of the questions. So the first one's a fun one. Is Caitlyn being able to solo 1-4 healthy for the game? And really, I mean, whether Caitlyn or not, right? Like Caitlyn obviously tied to the T-Hex, but really the question is, should any champion be able to solo 1-4 or not? And this is a tough one because there's a part of you that wants to be the rules lawyer, right? And this is the true of any like game design, right? It's like, hey, the rule is you must place at least 2-1 costs with no items on the board to beat 1-4, and that must always be true, right? But there's also a little bit that's like, it's fun when you discover that moment where you're like, oh, wait, Caitlyn can solo it if you're in exactly the right spot. That feels cool. Like you've discovered that you broke the game. And part of having a deep game is being able to discover things like that, right? If every rule is laid out like a perfect, lawyer, then there's nothing fun to discover. And that's kind of the challenge. But at the same time, then you could make the argument that like, well, I didn't know I could get this slight advantage, and it becomes this weird like knowledge gap where it's like, oh, you didn't know if you just put Caitlyn in this thing, but like that's also some of the fun, right? Is people creating these guides and talking about like their discoveries. So all of this is to say, like, there are pros and cons to letting a champion break the rules like this. But at the end of the day, the thing I would always go back to, and maybe this is my Nintendo background, maybe this is just, preferences as a human being. And so, like I said, I'm not saying that I'm 100% right here. I think this is actually one of those subjective truths as opposed to a factual truth. But subjectively, I believe that games are fun when you can push the limits of them, discover new things, and sort of break the limits of what you thought was the rule. Which means, do I think Caitlyn should be able to solo 1-4? Yeah, I do. I do think Caitlyn or any champion should be able to solo 1-4. Now, do I think that also means we need to balance accordingly? Yeah. So, for example, if one domino effect of this could be, hey, because Caitlyn can solo 1-4, it is always possible to have a 10 gold opener 100% of the time. Therefore, economy is now accelerated throughout the game. The average economy generated goes up on a game state. And therefore, the leveling curve is now too generous and it's too easy to hit level 9. Therefore, you actually, like, because Caitlyn can solo 1-4, you actually need to nerf the level cost to 9, right? Like, those two things can be related, even though they're not like a direct correlation. But it's one of those things that you have to take into account because our philosophy has always been balance around the optimal play. And if the optimal play is always make sure you get that extra gold generated by soloing 1-4, then that needs to be the case, right? And so, yeah, again, I'm more just laying out all the different details here. But again, if I have to make a gut call, like my choices are no, make it so that champions can't solo it, or let players break it and balance around that fact. And I think I go with the latter. I think, again, we strive on TFT being a deep game with lots to learn and lots of things to discover. And I think being able to discover the fact that Caitlyn can solo 1-4 is a good thing. So I think that's my answer. Now, again, all of this is completely separate from the fact that do I love that Caitlyn in particular has a lost streak paradigm, which then ties into Bard, which then ties into guaranteeing a Caitlyn 3 at 3-1, which then guarantees a T Hex on 3-3. Like, no, there are other things that need to change within that whole paradigm as well, right? I know one of the obvious ones people have been talking about is like, should T Hex have a level requirement? Maybe. Or another example, which should just be is T Hex 1 just ridiculously overpowered? Or, I mean, you guys are going to see it on the patch. You saw it on the patch rundown by way right now, but the obvious one was T Hex gaining too much value from eating the easiest champion for T Hex to eat, which is a caster? And the answer is yeah, by a lot, So that's the area we chose to focus on for that particular problem. But yeah, so anyway, TLDR, I do think it's fun to be able to break the PvE rounds, let people like Leduc figure out here's the units that can solo and use that to your advantage. And I think that's a good thing for the game. So I would continue to allow that and continue to keep shipping stuff like that. So yeah. Okay, next question. This is one that I don't know. This is a hard one. So let's pretend for a minute we ship 16.3. And 16.3 is the most balanced patch of all time. Every champion's playable, all the lines are playable, all the augments are between 4.2 and 4.8. Everything's harmony. We did it. Parades in the streets. The game's balanced. What happens next? What happens after that, right? Like, what do we do? Now, I've been asked this question many times over the years, but I'm going to try to break it down even more, because my answer throughout the years has always been, if we reach that state, 16.4's patch would be nothing, right? Maybe a couple bug fixes, whatever. But again, I assume this question is like all the bugs are fixed too. The answer is nothing, right? Like, the answer is we would leave it in a good state and people could play it for a while. But here's where that gets complicated. The reality of today's entertainment industry is that unchanging novelty, or like lack of novelty, can be a death sentence to games. Games do not survive the interest by standing still, right? And I know some smart asses can be like, but chess is still around. And yeah, it's like there's a reason chess comes and goes in the interest space. It's like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then people lose interest in it because it hasn't changed. It is what it is, like, change inherently creates interest. So we could only leave it alone for so long. I do think there's a world where if the live team got the set to a balanced state, then maybe what they do is start creating some new augments to play with that we can use in the evergreen space. Or, I think augments is the big one. Trying to think, what else would I have the team do, assuming we were just like done. I mean, obviously the big one is work on the next sets, right? Because that's the other thing too. We at least protect ourselves from the stagnation, right? Because 16.3 is perfectly balanced, so that would be 16.4, 5, 6, 7, 8, no patches. Can we survive a month and a half, 2 months with or I guess 2.5 months with no changes? Probably, to be honest. Probably. Another thing that we could have the team do that we've been meaning to do for a long time is like bigger systemic tests, right? Like, a good example would be like the matchmaking. These are things that we just haven't had a lot of time to devote to trying to fix. But if the set's perfectly balanced and I've got some extra live people, that's the thing. On the internal side, it's sort of like, cool. That means your job is done for a while. I can allocate you as a resource to a different problem, which is great, because that means we can get more done and deliver more value to players. On the player side, it's just a question of like, how bored do people get? I know for a while, I think it was set 10. I might have my sets wrong, but I'll remember this distinctly for the rest of my life. Was we had balance in a relatively good state, and the patches were relatively unchanged. Maybe it was 13. I don't remember which set. But I remember Frodan had on St. Vicious and Raditz, and they were both like, yeah, nothing's changed recently. I'm pretty bored, even though the balance was good. And, I always joke that, like, you can't please everybody. And there's going to be those people that are like, it's boring. Nothing's changing. But I do think we're protected for that to some extent because it's not like we're going to leave it unchanged for a year. We have a new set regardless, one way or another. A new set will create its own set of problems, and that's fine, right? So I think the real answer still is if we launched a perfectly balanced patch, we would leave it alone, let players enjoy it for the 2 to 3 months it was still live, and then use the resources that we normally use to balance the game to accomplish other things, whether that be future sets, systemic changes, anything else beyond the scenes, just extra labor on the future sets themselves. I think that's what would actually happen. And realistically, I'd love to see that experiment, right? We saw TFT, we see TFT not change for 3 weeks every year with a holiday break, but I don't think we've ever landed a holiday break where it's like, this balance is perfect. Certainly not this one. So it'd be an interesting experiment to see. And it's one of those things that, like, as we do it, we learn information. We learn about our player base. Like, how would our player base react if nothing changed for 2 months, but the state was, perfect? I don't know the answer to that. And that'd be one of those things I'd love to learn. So yeah, I think that's kind of the answer. I strive for that every day. Now, I think someone would tease me and say, but Mort, you'll never feel that way because you'll look at something and even in a perfect state, you're going to go, oh, but Viego's AD is 48 and actually it should be 47 because his round 2 win rate is just a little too high. That's the kind of over perfectionist you are, Mort. You'll never be able to drop it. But, like, I don't know. I hope that's not true. I hope if the set is good enough, I can, like, pencils down. And like I said, part of my job right now is that I'm supposed to be more focused on future stuff anyway, as opposed to live. So I kind of have to do that right now with set 16 anyway. As much as I want to keep poking at it, it's like, right, my job right now is future stuff. So yeah. So anyway, I think that's kind of what happens. And again, if we can get there someday, that would be great. I would love to see that, but we're not there yet. So all right. Next question is related to the patch, which is, you keep saying emblems are bad right now. Why are emblems bad right now? Why are they bad this set when they haven't been bad in previous sets? What's making them bad? Can you explain it to me? So one of the big changes we did for set 16 compared to other set was we lowered the power of verticals pretty dramatically. The difference between like 7 Demacia and a 7-piece from like Street Demon, right? Like Street Demon used to be a lot of power by comparison. And in fact, even with Demacia, you can see the difference between 5 and 7 Demacia is basically you get the Galio, which you can just get out of 7 Demacia for that, and you do a little bit of damage as you rally. That's it, right? And so the bump from going from 5 Demacia to 7 Demacia isn't as valuable as it used to be, okay? Now, it used to be so valuable that giving up an item slot was generally okay. Because when I say give up an item slot, you have to think about it as like, hey, if I have this, I don't know, let's take Silas. If I could put a death cap on a Silas or a Demacia emblem on a Silas, which one mathematically makes me better? And it's like, well, Demacia emblem on live right now is like, okay, you gain 35 armor and MR, and slowly your mana goes down to 30%. Okay, it's not bad. But instead, if you could have a death cap, well, that's already 50% damage plus the 15% damage amp. Like, a base item is just stronger than an emblem. So the Silas itself is going to be weaker. Now, I know you're thinking, well, wait a minute, we've had times where that's not true. And again, that's because the core effect of the trait was just way too strong. So I think some of the most famous ones are like Mage Emblem, right? Being able to double cast at 80% effectiveness is like a 60% boost by itself, and that's ignoring any of the utility, right? Like, for example, there were mage tank effects that would stun for 2 seconds, and double casting that just meant you're stunning twice for 4 seconds. Like, you're getting the full maximum value. That is plus 100% output. So there were certain effects in particular, and that's the thing. You actually go back and look at the history of emblems throughout TFT's time, and it was like strong origins that was just good to plus 1 and 2, or a really, really warping class effect that provided so much value it was better than a core item. Those are really the times where emblems have shined. And if you look at the trait web in this set, there just isn't any of that, right? Like, even stuff that you would think would be strong, like the example I always love to use now is Quick Striker Graves, right? If you can open with a Quick Striker Graves on live right now, and Graves is quite strong, matches with TF, they're trait pairs, your team gets 15% attack speed, Graves gets the on-kill heal, and the dash, and the extra attack speed. That should be solid, right? And the answer is, it's okay, but is it that much better than an IE? Not really. Is it that much better than a Quicksilver? Debatable, And so when that's like one of the best examples is just kind of okay, well, now what happens when you low roll Juggernaut? Like things like Juggernaut and Defender haven't been good for ages. You go back to like even set 14 where spats were OP, and nobody wanted a Defender emblem or a Juggernaut emblem, right? Like, those just haven't been good for ages. And so I think the combination of all of those things has made it so that, like, you don't really want a emblem on a character. Now, we went with the easy solve for now. Again, by the time you're watching this, you'll have seen the patch rundown, which was we slapped a bunch of stats on the emblems. Quite a few stats. I mean, like, let's not undersell it. But does that make Graves all of a sudden really want Quick Striker emblem? He's going to gain some extra attack speed, which is cool. The comparison between it and Quicksilver will be better, sure. But is it enough? We'll see. We'll see. But here's what I will say is the goal should, like, right now, the big sign that we're clearly in a bad spot is you get to a carousel where there's like 2 spats in a pan, and they're the last 3 things taken. That's a miss, right? Like, a spat is supposed to be a high roll that creates new opportunities. And I think short of 10 Bilgewater, nothing else is really being pursued with spatulas. And the one exception is, of course, when you're on the Rise portal and you've already got other emblems, turns out getting more emblems is even better. But beyond that, I think, we have to get it to a point where emblems are good. I think the class emblems getting unique effects was a good start. It kind of turns them into like mini artifacts, which is cool. I think, for example, the Bruiser emblem is like really cool. I think we were too cautious. I think, and this is where, like, rather than do it all in one thing and overshoot it, I think the patch we have coming out now where the emblems are going to get some stat buffs, that's good. We'll see the impact. And then we can keep going, right? If you tell me in 16.3 the emblems get another 15 AD on top of them, or some of those effects get even bigger, it wouldn't shock me. But I think it's better to be cautious. So, but yeah, and I think, again, that's one of those things that, like, I'm sure of for long-term TFT, right? It's a golden spatula. It's supposed to be a special thing. People should be desiring the golden spatula. Not 100%, right? There's going to be some lines that just, like, I don't want this emblem. But when there are lines that, like, intuitively should want the emblem and just don't, right? Like, Demacia is another example where, like, why wouldn't you want a Demacia emblem to be able to just throw it on your Shyvana? Like, that seems really good, and if that's not good, we've messed something up, So, got to figure that out. But yeah, that's kind of why. And I do think this is a long-term thing we have to solve, because I do think the trait design and the trait balance right now is really healthy. I think things like 7 Bilge, 7 Demacia, 7 Ionia are in a really good spot right now, and so I want players to want emblems while keeping the current trait balance where it is. So that's going to have to be our goal in the future. All right, I have two more questions here. The first one's really easy. I'm just going to get this one out of the way. Someone asked me, what was my favorite shadow item? And it's funny because part of me has to like block out shadow items. Like, I can remember the ones that definitely stood out, right? Shadow Blue Buff LeBlanc, Shadow Zeke's Vayne. Those are the ones that definitely jump out. Or like Shadow IE or Shadow IE JG on like Teemo, and then you'd blow yourself up because you didn't have any healing. Like I remember stuff like that. But to answer this question, I actually had to go back and look at all the old shadow items just to like remind myself, like what were the shadow items? What did they all do, and which ones did I actually like? And the two that jumped out at me that I remember really liking, Shadow Gunblade, very much a Brandbulance kind of like. I always liked that paradigm of like having a backliner who did a ton of DPS that could heal your front line through something like a Gunblade. I actually wish there was more of that. There wasn't in 15 because the pace of combat was too fast. But I like that paradigm a lot. So I remember liking that. But if I have to remember one that jumped out to me that I really enjoyed, and again, I'm not even saying it was healthy, I just remember liking it as a player at the time, was Shadow Locket. I remember Shadow Locket just being like this really cool, just a ton of frontline so that you could have a solid backline and you could position in such a way that like, yeah, there was a bit of a drawback with the mana generation, but you were just like turning your balls of health into bigger, tankier balls of health. And so I remember liking Shadow Locket a lot. I think you still see some of Shadow Locket and Locket kind of had came from that stuff. I think even the Infinity Force augment, that's one of the winter augments, comes from that time as well. So I think that's probably my answer. There's something fun about like beefing up your entire front line through an item that's a lot of fun. So yeah, I think that's my answer. All right, last question. I'll try to get through this so the video's not too long. And it's almost 9 o'clock, which means the patch notes are almost out for people. What does TFT look like without Ginsu's? Ginsu's has been around since set 1. It's been the most built item for 6 years. What does TFT look like without Ginsu's? I think the answer is not that different, which is weird to say because taking out the most built item would obviously have implications. But I think the real talk is if Ginsu's was deleted, something would replace it, right? We always go back to, when it comes to making items, basically what you do is take every stat in the game and find a way to amplify it, right? So AD, how do you amplify AD? Well, you've got Deathblade, you've got Kraken, you've got Giant Slayer, you've got Infinity Edge, stuff like that, right? Same with AP, same with armor, right? You've got Bramble, you've got Gargoyle, same with health, right? Like all items is an amplification of the core stat system. Well, attack speed is one of those core stats. It's a fun one, right? We have the new one, which is mana generation, but we have attack speed. And attack speed is the most fun stat that you can amplify. Watching your character go from 1 mana regen to 5 mana regen, who cares, right? Or even 10 mana regen. 10 mana regen's a lot, but it's like, okay, that's fine. They're casting more. That's cool. It's okay. But attack speed just like looks fun, right? When they're just like, like our players love that. It is just a fun experience, right? Ginsu's on Tryndamere, ignoring the fact that Tryndamere's OP, watching him just walk up and be like, chunk, 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 will always be fun, right? And so we would need an item to amplify attack speed. Now, it doesn't have to literally be Ginsu's, but I think there would definitely be some sort of item that would amplify. Like, we're not just going to look at attack speed and be like, sorry, no item gets to amplify this stat. So something would replace it. Something would amplify attack speed to some degree. Now, to take this question even further, though, I think if the question became, what if you were not allowed to have any items in the game that could amplify attack speed? What does TFT look like? that is a harder question, but I think the actual simple answer is just less fun, really dull. I think if you look at a lot of the other auto battlers, one of the things they always suffer from is the fact that their combats are incredibly boring to watch. And I think this would be a step in that direction, right? Is that like, yep, these champions sure are autoing and sure are casting their spells, I guess, and so it also just like removes a parrot. Like everything would become casters. I think if you go back all the way to the early Dota auto chess, like almost all the impact was in spells. But having a couple champions that can do that impact through auto attacks is like another interesting design space. And so I think we would lose some design space if we said we're not allowed to ever amplify the attack speed stat, you know? So, yeah, I think generally the answer is either we would just replace it with something else or it would just be a less fun game. And I think, again, even when Ginsu has been weak, like historically, there are times where you look at Ginsu's throughout TFT's history where it has some of like the lowest stats in the game, and it's just like not a preferentially built item. It still would be the most built item in the game because it's just fun. And, going all the way back to the first question today, which is like, games are meant to be fun. We have to keep the fun where we can, as much as we can. That's important. And so that's why to me, Ginsu's will sort of be one of those like fun pillars of TFT. It's why when we tried to rework it a little bit, everyone started freaking out because, I had players accusing me of ruining TFT because I was changing Ginsu's, and I definitely got a lot of heat for it. Unjustified heat, but I got a lot of heat for it. So, yeah. So, yeah, I think that's the answer. So, there you go. All right. That is it for today's episode. Hopefully, you guys are having a great time. You're reading patch notes. You're excited for the patch. I know I personally am looking forward to trying out some more champions and making sure more things are viable. But I also have to figure out how to play TFT a bunch without blocking. Like, I got to focus on Futureland. So, Futureland's where my focus needs to be because this train never stops. So, yeah. All right, cool. Hopefully, you have a great day. Hopefully, enjoy. That's going to do it for me. Until next time, take it easy.